And now, story time with Professor Lee. Howdy do. So Harold&Maude was released in 1971, the year your old professor was born. It was a huge flop when it came out. It probably would have been unheard of, actually, but the same weekend it was to be released, The Godfather was supposed to be released, and they had to do some reshoots on The Godfather, so they had to delay its release, and they needed something to put in its place. So they had this film already made, Harold&Maude, and they're like, I guess we'll open that in some screens. A lot of small movie houses that attracted young people and college students started playing it like at midnight shows and things like that, and it kind of got a following over the next 10 years or so after its release. Now fast forward to like 1983, somewhere in there, when my father took me to the Kentucky Theater to see Harold&Maude. Now, the Kentucky Theater, but it's a beautiful historic theater downtown Lexington, but back then it was pretty run down. It was opened in the 20s, by the way. So by the time the 80s came along, there had been fires, there had been ownership passing around, it was in disrepair, but it was still playing movies, and my dad took us there to see movies often. Well, my father was an active alcoholic at the time, so when he got us for the rare weekend, he would look for something to do where he could drop us off and go get something to drink. Bad idea, but that's what he did. So I saw some movies there I probably shouldn't have seen. I was probably too young for Harold&Maude, but he dropped it. And that time he actually stayed in the theaters. Sometimes he would go in and fall asleep, pass out from drink, while the movie was playing, and then when the movie was over, we'd wake him up, and then he'd drive us unsteadily home. But this time he stayed awake to watch Harold&Maude in that broken, rundown theater. And boy, he was furious when we left that theater, because my brother and me were excited by the movie and inspired by it, and we're acting it out after. You know how kids do when they like a movie. And my brother and I were just pumped by this movie, and my dad was furious. He goes, those people in that movie were crazy. Do you want to be crazy like those people? And I felt guilty at his anger and concern, but it did nothing to change the fact that regardless if those people were crazy, I did want to be like the movie. That's the only way I would have been able to phrase it if someone had asked me at the time. I just know I felt full in a good way after watching it. I felt alive and happy and curious about life and full of awe at the possibilities of life. I didn't understand a lot of it at that age, but I knew I loved it. And to this day, it touches and changes something deep inside me every time I watch it. But my father's reaction was telling. This isn't about different tastes. Not everyone will like the same movies or be moved by them in the same way, and nor should they. You know, difference is a good thing. What I'm talking about is how telling our different reactions were, how revealing of our values and ideas about the world and how it is and how it should be. See, the movie's themes about personal freedom and non-traditional love and affection and the questioning of religion and social institutions, our feelings and assumptions about life and death and how each of those things should be approached. See, my father was definitely not on board with those things, but I was. And being on board with those things, being interested in them, made me happy and content and to want more of that. So even at an early age, and even though I didn't fully understand it, a work of art helped me distinguish myself from my father and to entertain the idea of who I wanted to be, even if it was in opposition to who he was or who he wanted me to be, or what I had been led to believe I should be. Like my father's reaction and my reaction, and the contrast between those reactions taught me something about me, about him, about my relationship with him, about who I wanted to be. If I had been alarmed by feeling that way, I could have taken steps to not be like Harold&Maude movie type things. But it turns out I really did respond to that, and it inspired me. And I've sort of chased that my entire life. So there's my personal story about Harold&Maude and how analyzing art can help you understand things about yourself, where you are, where you want to be. Let's begin with some of our old friends, some terms you already know. First, irony, obviously, is a big part of both of these movies. Remember, irony deals in opposites. The more interestingly opposite something is than what you expect, the more ironic it tends to be. Harold and Maude is full of irony. The fact that Harold's obsessed with death and Maude's obsessed with life, and yet she is the one who ends up taking her own life because she thinks, she's lived long enough. But she goes into it joyously, whereas Harold ends up being alive at the end and sort of embarking on a new life, as sort of symbolized by him playing the banjo and driving the car off the cliff. So you got that reversal, that opposite of what you expected the whole time, and just their opposite views in general of life and death. There's a lot of irony at work. So let's talk about the older woman with the younger man kind of thing. There's an irony in the film. We have been sort of trained that an older man with a younger woman is okay, but people get kind of freaked out by an older woman and a younger man. I know some people really respond negatively to this movie because he ends up sleeping with and falling in love with Maude, who's 80. She's turning 80, and he's in his 20s. And so it's very upsetting to people. But if you do a search on the internet for movies and TV shows, books about age gap relationships, and almost all of them are age gap between an older man and a younger woman. And so I'm not pronouncing good or bad about any of this. What I'm pointing out is that we are taught more to accept that setup. But in a setup like this, it flips that. And it's very disturbing to people a lot of times that they're involved. So if you find that disturbing, it's worth asking. What is it that bothers you? And I don't have all the answers, but think about what kind of societal cues go in there. What have you been taught? What have you been led to believe is normal? What assumptions does that touch on for you? So if you're a woman and you're an actor, once you get past like your 20s or so, then you have to be like the MILF or the grandmother or the mother figure or something. You hardly ever get to be just this person who's complex and makes complex decisions and has to face complicated questions and is trying to figure out life and does some good things and some bad things. Those roles are usually reserved for men in general. Men are the ones in movies who are most allowed to be complex and, I've got problems and I've got to be honorable and do the right thing, and how do I do that? And women are usually relegated to roles that are pretty simplistic. They're either evil or they're good, or they're a mother figure, or that kind of thing. For Ruth Gordon, the actress, to get to play this role that is a person who is complicated, who does some things you could question, like stealing things from people, stealing people's cars. It's funny, but it's questionable. You don't know that you're totally on board with that, but she also does a lot of great things. And so she's this complex character who has, in her life, has had to make a lot of decisions. She's grown, she's changed. We see her grow and change in the movie thanks to Harold. She makes her own choices for her own self, unapologetically. Yet she loves and respects all other humans. A woman making her own choices without apology is still considered pretty shocking for a lot of people. Women are generally expected to make sure everyone else is happy and taken care of. You remember the hero's journey, the female character who's supposed to come into the scene and make the journey easier for the protagonist, or like help them see something about life. And so to have a woman who's on her own journey, who's making her own choices, is still considered pretty shocking to a lot of people. It's not something they're used to. She is a human first, free by nature as all humans are. And while her femininity is an important part of who she is, it's not all she is. And she would laugh at you if you said that all she was a woman. This kind of fully human woman character can sometimes throw people and make them uncomfortable for reasons they can't quite clearly articulate.